Well, good evening and welcome to the Kansas City Public Library. I'm Henry Fortunato, Director of Public Affairs, and we're really glad that you could join us for tonight's program on the pleasures of processed cheese. Next week, we're looking at the joys of junk food. Actually, for those of you who are new to the library, I don't want you to think that we do it quite this way every time, although based on tonight's repast, I think we have to reconsider that. I think the chefs tonight did a marvelous job. We will acknowledge them again momentarily, but what a great way to start an evening, huh? Okay, well, as some of you know, walking is one of my passions, and I try to be outdoors as much as possible. And on my walks, I see an endless array of wild plants, weeds, grasses, and other naturally growing things, all blossoming without human cultivation. Of course, I have absolutely no idea of what I'm looking at. Tonight's speaker, on the other hand, does indeed know her bittercress from her bergamot. Tama Wong spent more than 25 years toiling in the canyons of Wall Street as a financial services lawyer. So think about that. Given the state of the banking industry, given the state of the legal profession, one is tempted to believe that she gained a lot of experience mucking around the weeds. But now she does it for real, in the wild, seeking out a burgeoning cornucopia of edible plants as the forager for the exclusive New York restaurant Daniel, as well as for several other deluxe dining establishments in Manhattan. Her new book, Foraged Flavor, Finding Fabulous Ingredients in Your Backyard or Farmer's Market, which she co-authored with Eddy Leroux, is a combination field guide and cookbook with a dose of proselytizing about what she says, quote, is a feeling of connection with a ritual that is at the root of human existence. I like that. Foraged Flavor, I should add, has been nominated for a 2013 James Beard Foundation Book Award. Tonight's event would not be possible without the assistance, or more accurately, the persistence, of Grace Wang, a lawyer and adjunct professor formerly with the Leadership Studies program at Kansas State University and a devotee of foraged flavors. I think I began my correspondence with her about 10 years ago, and that was in dog years. No, actually, it's only been a few months, but I owe her and the K-State libraries, as well as our good friends at Cultivate KC, a great deal for helping to bring off tonight's event. Incidentally, Cultivate KC will be doing their by now annual program with us on Monday, June 17th, right here at the Central Library. I hope we'll see you all again at that time. Naturally, kudos are also on the menu, as it were, for the 5 chefs who prepared tonight's delicacies. That would be Ryan Brazil, Michael Faust, Howard Hanna, Jonathan Justice, and Debbie Gold. They all did a magnificent job, and I will find a way to bring them back. So, Foraged Flavor is, of course, available for sale tonight, courtesy of our friends at Reading Reptile, and Tama will be signing copies following her presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tama Matsuoka Wong.
So So they're actually taking the podium away because I'm too short to stand behind it. Okay. So they're taking all of this away. So now it's just me, no podium. Anything, and that was one of the most amazing. I've never had an introduction quite like that, Henry, so thank you. So I wanted to start by saying I've never really been to Kansas or Missouri before, and I'm really blown away. It's really an amazing community. I was on the Kanza yesterday. It's an amazing landscape. For those who haven't gone, I think you should. It's just striking. I've never seen anything like that. It's the last remnant, of the prairie, or meadows, as I like to call them. And just also, when I've been here, the amount of the people that I've met, they're just so warm and friendly and straightforward. But also, there's a huge spirit that I find in Kansas City, from the chefs, from the farmers, from small people trying to do something. And I really think that there's something happening in sort of food, and maybe it's a testament to why people are here and are interested in this. So anyway, thank you very much. I'm really blown away to be here, and really excited. So I was going to start off, actually I had this PowerPoint, but that was in another room, and now here I'm just going to be talking because we can't have anything. So might have to imagine some of the scenes in your mind, and I'll try and make sort of gestures to embellish. So people may, I'm going to start with, what is foraging? So there's a lot of talk about foraging, and I have to say, when I first heard the word foraging, I really didn't know what it meant, because I'm really coming from it I'm really interested / obsessed with plants. So I didn't really hear, I love to eat, I love to eat well, I love flavor, but I don't really follow everything. And so when I first heard foraging, it was when Daniel Balud, who I was bringing things into the restaurant, said, "How's foraging?" And I sort of was a little nervous because I thought I wasn't sure what he was talking about. I thought he was talking about, rummaging through some clothes or something. And so I just kind of looked at him like, oh, okay, I guess. And I didn't really know until people told me that this was a big thing that people were really interested in. And it's really returning back to the way we used to do things before we had agriculture. This is how we evolved as humans, hunting and gathering. But what we're doing today doesn't mean we have to go back to survival days. So my brand, or when I'm talking about foraging, I'm not talking about the kind of foraging you might see on the Discovery Channel, where somebody's braving some rapids and tearing open a camel and biting things off a tree. So obviously, another thing about me is I have 3 daughters, my husband, elderly parents. So I don't have a lot of time to be going off and doing things like that. I just want to eat well and normally. So I don't think it's really going out and doing survival things. I also don't want to really spend a lot of time searching around for things that I can't find. So I actually was in Napa and spent a lot of time with people who are mushroom foragers. It's amazing, but they have to go off like 10 miles to some place and camp out. And I just think that's great for them, but let people who want to do that. I'm just having a normal sort of house in New Jersey. So my brand when I'm talking about foraging, it's really much more about how you can incorporate things that are around you into your life and enjoy it and see what happens and how that affects what you're eating and your enjoyment. So that's kind of what I think foraging is for me, which I'm going to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about the other types of things. So I think the other thing people always ask me is how I kind of went from being a lawyer, as Henry so put it so well, to being a forager or a weed eater. So, and I have to admit that the way I really got into this, again, which is the common theme you might hear today, is because I really was not a very good gardener. In fact, I kind of have a black thumb. So I tried to plant these things. I wanted to have a vegetable garden, and I got those kits that you can buy and try to plant things, and somehow I just wasn't really good. And in fact, it got worse, increasingly worse, the busier I got over the years. And in the end, most of the year, the kits I would have, there were little raised bed kits you can buy from like Gardener's Supply, they would be kind of barren and weedy. And people would come over, and you feel sort of embarrassed, like people like to show, like, look, my tomato plant looks so beautiful. And I would just have a bunch of dandelions and chickweed and other stuff. So that's how I started thinking, well, wait a minute, this is all I have. And the other thing too is it would grow from about March through at least December. So much, much longer than you would think the normal agricultural growing season would be. And here I understand the growing season is fairly short, so you can have a long extended growing season here with the weeds. But I really discovered that these things were really, really great when other people, like my relatives, my father's relatives from Japan would come over, and they would see some of these weeds and say, they would be all excited, because they would say like, oh, this is our memory of our 7 treasures of spring. Hakobe, the chickweed, which I will pass around maybe. Or the Japanese knotweed, Itadori, the tiger stick. So they would have these memories of these things, and they were eating these in other countries as culinary delicacies. And here we were tromping on them as weeds, and in fact, spending a lot of time trying to get rid of them. So that kind of sparked my interest in starting to research the weeds and things that we see around us, and not only just to see what's edible, but to see their history and who's eating them today, not just in caveman days, but people are eating these things around the world. So I think that all I'm really trying to do is connect us back with what people are doing, but we've just lost that connection. And sometimes I think because we're a country of immigrants, that we've kind of have lost that connection with our grandfathers and grandmothers who would normally pass on this knowledge to us. So just trying to bring some of that back. And so it's been really exciting. The next kind of part of my once I decided the things were edible, is I tried to buy all these edible plant books about, okay, it's edible, what's edible, going around, picking them. And most of, I was really into plants, so I could pretty much tell what were the plants. I got to know what all the plants were. But when I would look in a lot of the books, they would have recipes which pretty much sounded like boil 3 times to reduce bitterness. I don't know if you've seen these. And that just sounded like a big mush to me. Or put in a tea or salad. And so, just heaping a huge pile of dandelion greens in a salad was something my mother tried on me back in the 70s. And I just remembered that did not taste good. And then I tried, actually on my daughters, I have 3 daughters, I tried the tea thing on them, like, okay, this thing, you can put it in tea. And they would just be like, this is disgusting, thumbs down. It just tasted like water with a stick in it. So I was really looking for a way that, okay, all this stuff is edible, people are enjoying them, but how can we use it in the way we eat every day, right? In like chicken salad or whatever we're doing. And so I was looking for recipes, and we could come up with our own, but what happened is I started to, I was eating and some friends had us eating in New York at this restaurant, Daniel, which is a 3-star Michelin, one of the top 10 restaurants rated in the world. And they said, why don't you bring stuff in from your meadow? Because they knew I had all this stuff and plants, and I brought something in, and they made it into some great meal, a part of our meal for that evening. And we went back later to congratulate the chefs. Wow, thanks, that was really great. And I had a little picture of my meadow, which I had given them, so they knew I hadn't picked it off the highway or something like that. And it just happened to be the guy who I ended up doing the project with, Eddy Leroux, and he said, they said I have a very good imitation of his accent. So, what else do you have in your meadow? And I said, I've got lots of things. What are you looking for? And he said, bring me everything. So then, if you know me, if people who know me and worked with me when I was a lawyer in my past, they know that if I say, I'm going to bring something and I'm really passionate about it, I am really going to do that. So I did warn him, this isn't just like, hi, talk to me sometime. I'm really going to start doing this. He was like, oh, of course, yeah, I said it, so yeah. So then I started bringing this in because I was working pretty close to where they were, and I started bringing things in every week. I brought in everything that I could find that was edible. It was marked edible. And then, he would have it in these categories: cardboard tasting, edible but barely, possibilities, amazing. He'd be documenting everything. And then I realized after doing this for about 2 months that this person is about as crazy and obsessed as I am. And I'm not really going to maybe meet somebody who's going to be that, to come in 2 hours early on a 14-hour day once a week and go through this and document and remember all the names, even though English is not their first language. So we started calling this the project. And part of it was, then he would try and cook it like 5 different ways. Like, braised, raw, for all the kinds of ways. And then he would think, okay, this is what tastes good, and this is the parts. And so then after, one of the key things that I learned, it was very fascinating. One of the key things I learned about thinking, that changed the way I thought about weeds and edible plants, is just like any kind of food, it has a peak season, right? So you're not trying to pick a peach when it's green, and we know this because we're familiar. But so the weeds also have the time when it's the best for eating and for doing that. So this became a huge creative project that then I got my recipes, and then hopefully the reason we did the book is so we can share the results of this with everyone, so people can go out themselves and know when is the best time, how to pick it, and how to use it so it tastes delicious, not just edible. So that's kind of how the little story started, and it came up and got bigger and bigger. But so why am I, why should you care? It's kind of interesting, quirky, maybe wacky. Why am I sitting here? Why do I feel so passionately about this? Because I actually think that what this has to do is important. I actually think that the weeds that I'm talking about are not only from our past that we're connecting things, it's also important for our future, because it's really connecting those things which are, and I think I see a lot of people here that I know, they're thinking these are our important challenges, and weeds tie into that. That is our health, our environment, and our food. These are our big challenges. So why? Why is that? Because actually, we had a huge drought last year, and there's a lot of questions. The UN has come out with things, a report about we're not going to have enough food to feed our growing population the way we currently practice agriculture by year 2050. And we need to start, looking for more sources of food rather than the current that include the system, but also expand beyond what we're doing now. There's also a lot of things out there about we need more diversity in our diet, so our health. We're eating really only most of our diets are based on 4 plants. They're like soybeans, rice, corn, and wheat. And almost the rest of our vegetables is about 25. And they say that a lot of the well-known, like the Cleveland Clinic, is saying that our diseases of today are not really diseases, they're actually nutritional deficiencies, because we're not getting enough of, maybe we haven't put a name on all the micronutrients, but there are all these things which we evolved as humans eating that we are not getting because we're focusing only on the things which we have names for. So one of the things that I think is great about these weeds is that it helps to increase the diversity of your diets. And I think one of the talks that I heard, I've been going to different talks, and I think a really easy way that there is to describe this is that it really comes down to the soil. So a lot of times I work with organic farmers and I look at some of their soil, and a lot of farms you see, no matter if they're rotating, a lot of the soil is pretty dry and kind of depleted. That's why we have to add fertilizer. But when you add fertilizer, you're only adding a couple nutrients, right? But actually, what people are saying, what I've heard some scientists say, is that organic, natural soil that has not been farmed over and over has almost a complete table of elements of nutrients and micronutrients in it. And if you look at a little patch of prairie or meadow, you take about a square meter, over a year it will have about 50 different plants that rotate naturally through that. And I can see because I have it on my own place. And so if you think, just as a common sense point of view, think of the diversity of nutrients and things that are in that little patch of soil. And you think, okay, that's in the soil, it goes to the plant, and we eat it. So it's just really sort of natural to the common sense logic of why the stuff is really good. And so a lot of these plants, and as you see they come up more and more, like for example, purslane, which is one of the plants which is very drought tolerant, has one of the highest omega-3 things in it. So you can see that they have really high nutrients. And I think the chefs, and I'm looking back at them, I think that when something is really nutrient dense, it also is very flavor dense. So instead of being kind of a bland, washed out kind of flavor, it has intense flavors. And that's why these guys like it, because it's incredibly, right? It's incredible flavors, and that's why they get so excited about it. And so it's really great working with them because they can come up with some of the ways to use these they're cooking 6 days a week, they're creative, they love this stuff. How many ways after you've been cooking for 20 years can you cook a strawberry or make a strawberry again? So they really like this. So I think they're an integral part of this. And you've got great chefs here in Kansas City, so it's really lucky that you have such a great community. So. So that's really some of the main reasons why I feel, I think this is a really important thing. And it's not just going on a nature hike and pointing out, okay, here's this plant, this is plant. I think it really is something that can be impactful and that we can actually use to rethink about the way that we're living. But the real reason that I feel so passionate about this, if that hasn't come across already, is that it's so, we have all these problems. We read every day in the newspaper, there's this, and there doesn't seem to be any solutions. To me, this is easy. It doesn't take any money. It doesn't take, a huge amount of time. You just can go into your backyard and pick some dandelion leaves. Just pick them tender and green. And this morning, we just put some into, I know people like bacon, and put it into a bacon potato, breakfast. And it just adds a little bit of kick and nutrition. So it's really, really easy. Some of the things that I'm just going to pass around some plants we can talk about and to show you. But all this kind of stuff, you have great stuff here. And the other thing that I found is, I picked on purpose in the book plants that are weeds or growing across the country. But it just is quite gratifying to come here and say, yes, we find all the same things in a very small part. So one of the things that is coming out a huge amount now, and I think Howard used in his dish, we went out foraging earlier this afternoon, is henbit. So I don't know if a lot of people are nodding. But I'm just going to pass it around. I don't know if people do this normally in these things. But since I don't have the PowerPoint thing and you can't see it, you might as well feel it yourself. And then I'm sure I've seen, if you see anything purple right now in a backyard, it's pretty much henbit. It's all over. It's amazing. So I'm going to pass this around and kind of talk about it. So, okay. Okay, so I can pass this around. So it has these little purple flowers. It's like over backyards. I mean, you can just see seeds of this all over right now, right? All over Kansas City. We picked a whole bunch today. Sometimes I think that the reason people don't want to is because I don't know why we give in English these ugly, ugly names like henbit, the henbit. And I mean, can you imagine trying to explain this to someone, Danish or French who doesn't speak English, and they're like, henbit, what is that? Is that one word? The hen bit this? Or like, I don't understand. We can't put something on our menu that's called henbit or bed straw or something like that. Whereas the name in Japanese, so a lot of these plants are not indigenous to here, and they like to follow people where they go. So that's why we can find them in our backyards and things. And it's also pretty sustainable because they're not as connected to the underlying ecology of the landscape the way the prairie is. So fine, pick 100% of all the henbit in your backyard, and there won't be really a big problem. Then the Japanese name for it, because it's also found in Japan, means dancing lady's little hat, which is so much more poetic, right, than the henbit. And the one other thing I would say, so when you see this, I think people can recognize this. This from almost all the chefs, including I think today's, and you can correct me if you disagree, I think it tastes good. I mean, unanimously. It tastes kind of nutty, but it has a kind of frilly texture to it. So what the chef, the recipe tried to do in the book is to try and balance that texture with something really smooth, like an avocado vinaigrette or a cipollini onion. So you're balancing. You're not just eating a plate of henbit like that. Right? And you'll also see that the way I picked it is I'm not just pulling out, you have to think differently, right? You're not thinking of it, it's just not a weed, it's actually food, good food. So when you're picking it, you're just taking the top bits, you're not just picking the entire sprawling plant and throwing it in a saucepan. You're really picking it the way you would, just put it in a plastic bag and it'll keep there for about a week. So, when I look at these things, to me, it's nicer, it's so fresh, and it's so actually the tender and has so much flavor. I can't find anything in the supermarket like this. And it's literally in our backyards. And that's why I feel, so passionate about hoping that, other people can enjoy this too. Because for us, we've got our refrigerators stocked full of this all the time. And I think that the chefs and other people can enjoy this too. The other thing that I'm going to pass around, I don't know, just pass the bag around. It's like I carry these garbage bags all over. I'll go this way. So this, people probably should recognize. This is chickweed. Most people recognize. This is, but there's chickweed and there's chickweed. So this is good chickweed. I'll pass this around. So, sometimes when I go and you see chickweed like on a field or something, then it's really, the texture is very important. So if the texture is really dry and fibrous, it's just not going to taste that good when you're trying to do it. So you'll see this is like beautiful chickweed. It was kind of on a, in a partly shaded area. It wasn't in direct, and so you can see it's tender. It's like a microgreen, and we actually think it tastes better slightly cooked, because if it's just raw and you just eat it like that, it tastes kind of grassy. But when you cook it, it's just very mild. You can substitute it for spinach, any kind of recipe with spinach, and it's supposed to be incredibly high in vitamins from what they found from it. And this is also like all over, right? Yeah, so why are we not enjoying this stuff? It's there, it's offered to us by nature. And this is one of the Japanese 7 treasured herbs of spring. So they're, serving it in all their fine dining places, and, they feel like a little heart pitter-patter when they see it. So in France, it's also called la stellaire, the little star. So I think, this is things that we can really enjoy. And it's not anything that I'm doing that's, trying to be risky and eat something that nobody knew. This is stuff that people are eating now around the world. And we have it in abundance here. So it just makes so much sense. Okay, then, do people like me passing the things around? Is getting to people? Okay. What? But I think if you feel it, right, and then you see it, then it kind of gives you better understanding about it. So should I start someplace else that nobody? Okay, can we pass it back so I don't have to jump off the thing? Okay, so the next thing is something which I also find I didn't see a lot of it now because it's not really the season, but it's probably, so these things are all like every single chef I'm working for is asking me for chickweed. Like chickweed. And I actually they were doing some charity dinner, and then in New York, and then I had to UPS them extra chickweed because they ran out or something. So just to let you know. So the next thing, which is also, and henbit is also top, I'd say within the top 10 that people love. So you're so lucky. You have in such abundance here. They're probably jealous. Tama, they have henbit over there in Kansas City. So the other thing, which is all over, because people already told me they've seen it all over in their backyards. If you don't have it, you can probably go to Prairie Moon, which is a great native plant nursery, and buy one and plant it in your backyard, which is the sumac tree. I don't know if people know about it, but it has, and I would have had a little picture, but there's pictures in the book. It kind of has these clusters that are kind of like a torch red cluster. And then I don't know, people here are probably much less kind of out of it but people in around the New York area, like 95% of them, if you say sumac, they're like, oh, poison sumac, And I even had somebody come up to me once and said, do you know I was picking it, and they said, do you know that's one of the most poisonous things on earth? They were trying to warn me. But so the poison sumac, in case people are wondering, has a white cluster, and this has kind of a reddish cluster. So unless you really are colorblind, then you're not going to have a problem. And the great thing is that, so this, as opposed to the other plants that I talked about, is actually indigenous. There's an indigenous tree, and the American Indians used to use this in the winter. They used to make sumac aid out of it, a kind of a drink that has a tart, fresh, clean, refreshing taste. And they used to have it because it's very high in citric and vitamin C. So you didn't have lemons back then. What were people doing? The other thing which they found more recently is they've done studies. There's some people that have been doing studies on the antioxidant properties of various native trees and indigenous trees and plants, and they found that it has multiple times the amount of antioxidants as blueberries. So I love to have this. I feel like, oh, you're just getting your little antioxidant, shot. And the thing I'm passing around is something that I actually take the clusters, and you can dry it, then you grind it in like a grinder, and then the seeds separate from the fruit, the red fruit, and you pass it through a sieve, and then you just have only the fruit, and then you can keep it as a spice. It can keep for more than a year, definitely more than a year, probably 2 years or something. We haven't actually measured, but we have a recipe for something called za'atar, and that's what I'm passing around. And so the great thing is you can see, if you smell it, the kind of flavor it has. It has this lemony, fresh, clean flavor, that's the sumac, with sesame and thyme. And it actually is used a lot in the Middle East, but it's becoming much more popular. Like I even saw it on the Rachel Ray show. And they have it, they do sell it in Dean and DeLuca. They sell za'atar at Williams-Sonoma, but I noticed they didn't put the sumac in it, which is probably the best part. So the za'atar you can use, we have a recipe that you roll chicken in it, and then it has a great flavor without having to use salt or sugar or anything. It's just the pure flavor of the ingredients. And a lot of Lebanese or people from the Middle East where it comes from are using it like on pizza, on flatbreads. They're using it in like lemony yogurt because it's that lemony taste. And they're also using it on like breakfast things, which is really interesting. So it's just so versatile, and it's something that you could make from getting stuff right around you. And actually the sumac is it clones out and spreads. So it's like, you don't have to worry about really losing too much of it because it's kind of a weed. So I think that's really the main things that I was gonna talk about. So I don't know whether Henry is here and wants me to take questions if people have questions. I guess the last thing I would say is that there's two other things I'd say. One thing is that I've noticed as people get more interested in foraging. As you can see, I'm coming from a stewardship point of view. So not all plants are the same. And I think I've kind of said this, but I'll kind of re-emphasize it. So it's not the same thing to go and take an invasive plant that is spreading like garlic mustard all over, which you have here, which I've seen. And it's not the same thing to take that as opposed to taking a declining indigenous plant. And so I do have a sustainability code, which can help you to say which are the kinds of plants that you can take in abundance, take all you want, take 100%, and the US government might even pay you to do it. Versus plants where if you're doing it, you're really doing something to affect the kind of cycle, the ecology of the landscape. And so I have that in a very easy red, yellow, green code next to each species in the book. And the last thing I would kind of just say as general remarks is that ever since I've been doing this, and it's been like a slow progression. You just kind of get more and more and more sucked into this. Is that it just feels amazing, and that once you sort of really start to do this, you really will feel revitalized, and it brings something out in you that reconnects you with something. And a lot of the things that I think bother us, if I think people did more foraging or just had that connection with nature, just in actually the doing of it too, I think that you will feel really great. And it'll be kind of hard to go back, I think, to whatever you're doing before. So I know that for us, once we've actually even just started eating these, it's very hard to go back to eating just really generic, bland food because we got used to this flavor, and it doesn't take that much to satisfy us because we're not just kind of munching things. So I really hope that I could encourage some of you to try some of these things yourself. You certainly have a wealth of it in Kansas City, and to go to your chefs and tell them to start cooking up more of the stuff too. So that's kind of my main thing. I don't know if people have questions.
I do have one question. You have an abundance of some things now. Are some of these able to be frozen so that you can use them later on?
Yes, so we've been starting to experiment with that too. Definitely some of the greens like nettles blanch and freeze, it works out really well because we have a huge amount of them in a certain time. And then it's kind of like zucchini, right? So then what do I do with all this? But it actually blanches and freezes really well, or wild mustards do really well too. So a lot of these things do blanch and freeze really well. So I don't know that. Yes?
I was wondering, speaking of the U.S. government,
Oh.
have you run into any kind of jurisdiction, or does your metal have to be inspected? I've run into some issues occasionally. You know, you can't just grow food and feed the kids at school without moving legislation first and certain issues. But so my question is, you know, are you finding it difficult?
Yes, I actually have been talking to, so people who are foraging are starting to talk to each other about what's happening. And obviously, the most strict area is in game, so wild game. You are not allowed to serve wild game in the United States in a restaurant, period. There's some weird rules. There's this guy, Hank Shaw, who's come out with a duck book. He has all these, he explained in this state, you know, you can go and get roadkill if you hit it and call 911 or something. You know, you can talk to him. It's very complicated. To me, it's not complicated. Then there's like mushrooms, and I think there are some places, and I can see, you know, because mushrooms, 95% of mushrooms are not edible, and 2 to 4% are so poisonous that you will die, and it's not pleasant, like you have liver failure. So I can see why they would be nervous about people misidentifying, because some can look very similar if you don't do spore prints, et cetera. So I know that there's some concern about, you know, mushrooms and making sure that the person is properly identifying them. And there's certain places you get a permit for mushroom foraging. But I know that you know, for myself, I mean, I practice certain principles. So even though if there isn't a specific law on it, I think there's also certain ethical and civil responsibilities, such as getting permission from the place that you're foraging. I mean, I don't know. I just feel like if it's somebody else's property, why should I go and take something from it? But it also helps from a good practices point of view, because if you know the person whose property it is, and they're working with you, then you can know what they did. Did they spray it? Did their dog, is that the place their dog likes to go? You know, whatever. And you won't know that unless you're really working with them. The two organizations I work the most with are conservation groups and organic farmers. And most of the time, I'm taking away things they don't want. So they actually call me. They know when I have the peak, when my peak, and they'll say, oh, can you go and get the, you know, thing that they're trying to get rid of? So it's really a very good collaboration. And I mean, I haven't had, you know, any problem with someone saying, you know, is this an approved? And I think partly if you're taking it from an organization that is a farm already, or a place, I think a place that's a conservation group that follows a good management practice, I think if you start with something like that, you're going to be much better off in terms of not having people wondering whether you're taking something from the side of the road or something like that. So, yes?
Do you juice very many of your forages? Do you juice them?
Oh, juicing. Okay. The answer. So the question was, do I juice a lot of forage stuff? And to be completely honest, no. So, and it may be cultural, because you know, a lot of Asians don't like to eat juiced raw things, and partly for Chinese, they feel like it's not as digestible. You know, especially a lot of this stuff is very nutrient dense, and so if you're actually cooking it, even, and I'm not talking about boiling for 3 hours again, but it helps the digestion and the absorption of the nutrients in the body. And I think Michael Pollan just came out with a book called Cooked, which I have not read. I don't even know if it's completely out, but I think a lot of that talks about actually the act of cooking, and that, you know, so it really, not that you should go completely one way or the other, but there is something to be said for cooking some things and not just, you know, juicing in terms of what I just said. So. Okay, yes?
I live in a pretty wooded area, and I don't have any dogs, I don't have any cats. I do have deer, raccoons, possums, and squirrels. How do you wash? How do you feel comfortable enough to eat what you just picked out of here?
Well, so the question is, because I know these people don't have, is that this lady lives in a wooded area, and they have a lot of critters there, like deer and raccoons. And so how do I feel comfortable? How would one feel comfortable knowing that there's all these animals running around and picking something and not thinking that, you know, they're somehow, you know, not have bacteria and things like that? So I think, well, one answer is that's why also if you're cooking something, it also actually helps with that. That's why actually some ancient cultures which do recycle waste, they are always cooking their vegetables because they use that as a practice. So in China, they do always cook their vegetables because they use it as a practice. I'd say, like for myself, I guess you could be growing vegetables there too, and the same critters are going around and trying to eat it. So I don't really look at it as that different from trying to have vegetables there. I do have a deer fence in my place, so and a lot of the farmers that I do have that. But yes, you have to kind of look around and see if you see there's evidence of a lot of deer, particularly that's where I am. But other than that, I think, I just make sure that when I'm looking, I don't see any evidence of things around that. So, nothing answered. Yes?
These things, do you wash them before you refrigerate them, or are they just like fresh vegetables that you want to wash them when you use them?
Okay. The question is, do I wash them? Do I take them out and then wash them and then put them in the refrigerator? So the answer is no, I don't. And partly, I did kind of learn this, and chefs over there tell me if you think this is differently, but from what I can tell is that they think that actually especially because the texture is tender, if you wash them or put them in water, it tends to affect it, and it doesn't hold up as well. So it's better to keep it in the refrigerator without washing. And then if you're going to wash, just do it kind of lightly. I know that when I see in the restaurant, what they do is they have like a big metal thing, and they just swirl it around. They're not spraying it with like a shower of like water, because if it's kind of fragile, it actually breaks up the formation of the plant. So I don't know if that's helpful. Yes? Is there a better time of day? Sorry? A better time of day? The morning is usually the best time of day that I like to pick, because it's kind of fresh, it's coming up. Of course, if it's December, I try to pick the middle of the day just for my own comfort. And I know somebody had a question over here. Yes? Yes?
What is the Japanese name for henbei again?
Oh, odorokuso, the dancing lady's hat. Yes? Yeah, so the question was if you're talking about urban foraging, we're actually in the city and trying to forage, questions about the soil quality, and have I come across anything like that? So for example, in New York City, it is illegal to forage in Central Park. And I've talked to the park people, because actually the park people are going outside the park and they're picking out garlic mustard. They're trying to find volunteers. So I was like, well, why don't we show the volunteers a couple good recipes? But they were, it's a big, big city and all kinds of people, and so it's like 10 million people, and some people were going into Central Park, and they showed me this picture of somebody coming out of Central Park with a cherry tree in their backpack. That would never happen in Kansas City, right? So that's what they have to contend with. So they have to be much more, It's like then backlash because people abuse it. They're doing things, or they're trying to restore and plant little spring ephemerals, and people are going and digging them all out and trying to use it to forage, right? So. But yes, in terms of the quality of the soil in an urban area, that is definitely something that is serious. One of the things that the park people did say is that a number of parks in their area are actually brownfields. So even if they felt that people could be controlled, there are a lot of places that they feel they definitely shouldn't go because the quality of the soil is not good. So I try to use as a rule of thumb any place that you would grow a vegetable, because it's just like a food. So people that I know in Harlem have like a little planter. They were trying to grow tomatoes in there. They didn't do well, and they had wild cress come up all in their planters. So any place that you could plant a vegetable and maybe it didn't grow so well, then you have weeds, right? You have weeds that come up, so you can enjoy them. Yes?
So we have to worry about 95% of mushrooms, where the wild weeds fall in that percentage.
Oh, how much? So I think the majority of plants are not poisonous. I think there's about 6,000 edible plants. So there's a lot of edible plants. The question that I mostly have is, again, that range of cardboard, if you're dying in survival, yes, edible, and then delicious. So there's that kind of spectrum. And maybe some things, if we, work on the chefs here, they can get more things from the edible into the delicious category. Because I have people that call me now and ask me things like, can you come up with a recipe for crabgrass? And then some people were even saying, like, there's this, I don't know if you have them here, but they have these things that are bothering people, like stink bugs. There's this bug that comes around, it's like an Asian bug, and it's going, some people have, so they're like, then someone even called me and asked me if I have a recipe for stink bugs. And I gotta tell them, I'm not doing insects. Yes?
I wondered if anyone knows if there are any farmers market vendors in Kansas City that are providing.
Yes, would you like to stand up? Linda? We were just foraging at her place, a really nice place. She's supplying a lot of the chefs right here in Kansas City. Great henbit, great chickweed, really great stuff. And she actually is restoring a prairie on her place, too.
Okay, so once again, the library brings people together.
Thank you.
Tama, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.